The observation deck of the Galactic Defense Station hummed with nervous energy as Ambassador Kethvar watched the tactical display with growing unease. The Zephyrian diplomats' 4 eyes tracked the movements of what appeared to be a modest human fleet approaching the contested system of Altair Prime. Around him, representatives from dozens of species murmured in their native tongues, creating a symphony of concern that echoed through the crystalline chamber. "Surely they cannot be serious," whispered Commander Thaxon, his reptilian features creasing with worry. The Drakmari military officer had seen countless battles, but something about this situation made his scales ripple with anxiety. The Void Reapers have held that system for 3 standard cycles. Even our combined fleets couldn't break their stranglehold. Kethvar's tentacles curled thoughtfully as he studied the human formation. 12 ships. That was all. 12 vessels against a force that had decimated 3 separate coalition armadas, each numbering in the hundreds. The humans had politely declined offers of assistance, claiming they preferred to handle this internally. The audacity was either breathtakingly naive or terrifyingly confident. The Void Reapers were not merely another aggressive species. They were a force of nature, beings that had emerged from the dark spaces between galaxies with technology that defied understanding and a hunger that knew no satisfaction. Their ships were living nightmares of twisted metal and pulsing energy capable of draining the life force from entire planets. When they arrived in Altair Prime, they had turned 3 thriving worlds into barren husks within hours. "The human fleet is maintaining standard approach vectors," reported Lieutenant Zaranel from the communication station. Her melodious siren voice carried a note of confusion. "They're not even employing stealth protocols or irregular patterns. It's as if they want to be detected." Admiral Corvin of the Hegemony Navy leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the tactical display. The veteran commander had fought in more wars than most species had recorded in their histories, and his scarred hide bore testament to countless battles. "I've studied human military doctrine for 50 cycles," he rumbled, his deep voice resonating through the chamber. "They're methodical, yes. Stubborn, certainly. But they're not suicidal. There has to be something we're not seeing." The display flickered, updating with new sensor data. The Void Reaper fleet was massive, a writhing collection of biomechanical monstrosities that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. Hundreds of vessels, some the size of small moons, drifted in formation around Altair Prime's primary star. Energy readings from their ships defied conventional physics, showing power levels that should have torn reality itself apart. "I've heard stories," murmured Dr. Yilthara, the collective's chief xenobiologist. Her normally confident demeanor was replaced by uncertainty as her multiple arms gestured nervously. "Rumors from the Outer Rim. They say humans have secrets, technologies they've kept hidden even from their closest allies." Kethvar's translator implant struggled with some of the whispered conversations around him. Fear had a universal language, and it was being spoken fluently in at least 30 different dialects. The assembled dignitaries represented the greatest military and scientific minds of the known galaxy, yet all of them seemed bewildered by humanity's apparent confidence. The human fleet continued its steady approach, seemingly oblivious to the overwhelming odds. Their ships were elegant in their simplicity, sleek vessels that appeared almost primitive compared to the Baroque complexity favored by most spacefaring races. No external weapons were visible, no massive gun batteries or missile pods. Even their shields appeared to be running at minimal power. "Admiral," Zaranel called out, her voice tighter with concern. "I'm picking up energy spikes from the Void Reaper fleet. They've detected the human approach and are beginning to mobilize." The tactical display exploded with activity as the Reaper formation shifted. Massive bioships began to move with predatory grace, their living hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that hurt to look at directly. Smaller vessels, each still larger than most conventional warships, swarmed around the giants like parasites around their hosts. "By the 7 moons," breathed Commander Thaxon, "they're not just mobilizing a response force. The entire fleet, is moving to intercept. Kethvar felt a chill run through his nervous system. The Void Reapers had never committed their entire force to a single engagement before. They preferred to toy with their prey, sending only enough ships to slowly wear down their opponents while the remainder fed on the terror and desperation of dying worlds. This level of response suggested they viewed the human fleet as a genuine threat. "Perhaps we should warn them," suggested Dr. Yilthara, though her tone suggested she doubted the wisdom of the gesture. "Surely they don't understand what they're facing." Admiral Corvin's laugh was bitter. "I tried. Sent a priority message to their fleet command 3 hours ago, detailing our intelligence on Void Reaper capabilities. Their response was a single word: acknowledged. The human fleet had closed to within the outer sensor perimeter of the Altair system. Still no changes in formation, no apparent preparation for battle. Their ships continued to move with the steady, inexorable pace of a funeral procession. Yet somehow, that very calmness was more unsettling than any display of bravado would have been. Energy surge detected. Zaranel's voice cracked with tension. The Reapers are powering their primary weapons systems. Multiple targeting locks confirmed on all human vessels. The first phase of the battle began without warning. Beams of pure entropy lanced out from the Void Reaper fleet, weapons that had previously dissolved entire battle groups in seconds. The energy strikes reached the human formation, and nothing happened. The beams simply stopped, as if they had encountered some invisible barrier. No shields were visible, no energy dispersal patterns, no indication of any defensive system at all. The attacks simply ceased to exist the moment they came within 1,000 kilometers of the human ships. "That's impossible," Admiral Corvin whispered, his voice barely audible. "Those weapons phase-shifted through our most advanced shielding. They ignore conventional defenses entirely." But the humans weren't using conventional defenses, Kethvar realized. They weren't using any defenses that registered on galactic sensors. Whatever was protecting those ships operated on principles that the assembled military minds couldn't even detect, let alone understand. The Void Reaper response was immediate and overwhelming. More ships emerged from the shadow of planets, revealing the true size of their fleet. Biomechanical horrors that dwarfed space stations unleashed weapons that had been kept in reserve, exotic armaments that twisted space-time itself into weapons of unimaginable destruction. Reality bent around the human fleet as gravitational weapons tried to crush the vessels into singularities. Quantum disruptors attempted to scatter their atoms across multiple dimensions. Temporal distortion fields sought to age the ships into dust or trap them in endless loops of the same microsecond. Every attack failed. The human vessels continued their approach as if sailing through empty space, unmarked by assaults that should have erased them from existence. Their formation never wavered, their course never altered. 12 ships against the accumulated nightmare of the void, and somehow they were winning by simply refusing to acknowledge they should be dead. "This can't be real," Dr. Yilthara stammered, her multiple eyes wide with disbelief. "No species has this level of technological advancement. Not even the progenitors at the height of their civilization." But Kethvar was beginning to suspect they weren't witnessing technology at all. The patterns were too perfect, too absolute. This was something else entirely, something that operated on principles beyond the understanding of conventional science. The humans weren't using superior weapons or defenses. They were somehow existing outside the very rules that governed the rest of the universe. The Void Reaper fleet was now in full retreat, their bioships writhing with what could only be described as fear. Creatures that had devoured civilizations and drunk the dreams of dying worlds were fleeing from 12 simple human vessels that had done nothing more threatening than refuse to die. "Admiral," Zaranel called out, her voice hollow with shock. "The Reapers are withdrawing from the system. All of them. They're abandoning their positions around Altair Prime and jumping to deep space." The tactical display confirmed the impossible. A force that had resisted 3 coalition fleets was abandoning a strategic position because 12 human ships had approached them. No shots have been fired by the human fleet, no weapons have been revealed, no threats have been issued. They had simply arrived, and their mere presence had been enough to rout an enemy that had seemed invincible. As the last of the Void Reaper fleet disappeared into hyperspace, the human formation finally altered course. Instead of pursuing the fleeing enemy or claiming the abandoned system, they simply turned around and began heading back toward the edge of the system. Their mission, whatever it had been, was apparently complete. "We need to know," Admiral Corvin said suddenly, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror. "Whatever the humans did here, whatever they are, we need to understand." The balance of power in the galaxy just shifted, and I don't think any of us realized how far humanity has actually advanced. Kethvar found himself nodding in agreement, though part of him wondered if understanding was even possible. The humans had just demonstrated capabilities that challenged the fundamental assumptions about physics, warfare, and the nature of existence itself. They had faced down the Void Reapers not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through something far more disturbing. They had simply chosen not to be affected by the enemy's attacks, and somehow the universe had complied. The observation deck fell silent as the assembled representatives tried to process what they had witnessed. The human fleet was already disappearing into hyperspace, leaving behind only questions and the unsettling realization that they had been allies with a species whose true capabilities were beyond their comprehension. In the distance, the three worlds of Altair, prime hung in space like jewels, their surfaces beginning to show the first signs of renewed life as the Void Reaper influence faded. The humans had not only driven off an undefeatable enemy, but had somehow undone the damage they had caused simply by being present in the system. Kethvar's tentacles trembled as he contemplated the implications. If this was what humanity could accomplish with 12 ships, what were they truly capable of when unleashed? More importantly, what had driven them to develop such absolute power, and what did it mean for the rest of the galaxy that they had been content to hide it until now? The answers to those questions would prove to be more terrifying than anything the Void Reapers had ever done. 3 weeks after the Altair incident, Kethvar found himself aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony's Edge, part of an unprecedented joint expedition to the human homeworld of Earth. The coalition of species that had witnessed the impossible battle had unanimously agreed that formal contact was necessary. What they had seen challenged everything they thought they knew about humanity's place in the galactic community. The human response to their request for a formal audience had been characteristically understated: a simple acceptance and coordinates for a meeting point in the Sol system. No fanfare, no diplomatic protocols, no indication that they understood the magnitude of what they had revealed. It was as if driving off the most feared force in the galaxy was just another Tuesday for them. Dr. Yilthara worked frantically at her portable laboratory, trying to analyze the sensor data they had collected from the battle. Her multiple arms moved in complex patterns as she manipulated holographic displays, showing energy patterns that shouldn't exist. "I've run the calculations 17 times, she muttered, her usually melodious voice tight with frustration. "The humans didn't deploy any defensive systems we can identify. No shields, no countermeasures, no energy dispersal fields. The Void Reaper attacks just stopped." Admiral Corvin studied the tactical recordings for what must have been the 100th time. The massive hegemony officer's scarred features were creased with concentration as he watched the impossible unfold again and again. "In 5 decades of military service, I've never seen anything like this. It's not superior technology, it's something else entirely. Something that operates outside our understanding of physical law." The journey to Earth took them through systems that bore testament to humanity's expansion across the galaxy. Worlds that had been considered uninhabitable by other species showed signs of thriving human colonies. Mining operations in asteroid fields that should have been economically impossible. Space stations in orbits that defied conventional engineering wisdom. Yet none of it seemed particularly advanced by galactic standards. Human technology appeared to be roughly equivalent to what most species had achieved, perhaps slightly behind in some areas, and marginally ahead in others. There were no obvious superweapons, no reality-bending megastructures, no signs of the godlike power they had witnessed at Altair Prime. It's like they're deliberately maintaining the appearance of normalcy. Observed Commander Thaxon, his reptilian features thoughtful as he studied the sensor readings from a human freight convoy they had passed. Standard fusion drives, conventional hull materials, normal energy signatures. If I hadn't seen the battle myself, I would classify their civilization as developing but unremarkable. The Sol system itself proved to be a revelation in its ordinariness. Earth hung in space like any other inhabited world, its blue and green surface marred by the standard signs of industrial civilization. Orbital habitats dotted the space around it, but nothing larger or more sophisticated than what the Zephyrians had constructed around their own homeworld. Even Luna's mining operations appeared to use conventional extraction methods. Sensors are detecting approximately 12 billion humans in the Sol system, reported Lieutenant Zaranel from the communications station. Standard population density for a mature homeworld. No unusual energy signatures, no massive military installations. It's remarkably normal. That normalcy was perhaps the most unsettling aspect of their journey. Kethvar had expected to find evidence of the power they had witnessed. Massive defensive installations, exotic research facilities, some hint of the capabilities that could make the Void Reapers flee in terror. Instead, they found a system that looked like any other peaceful member world of the Galactic Council. The human fleet that met them was equally unremarkable. 5 vessels, sleek but unremarkable in design, escorted the diplomatic mission to Earth's primary orbital station. The humans aboard were friendly, professional, and gave no indication that they commanded forces capable of rewriting the rules of physics. They spoke of trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, and routine diplomatic matters with the same casual efficiency they might discuss the weather. Captain Sarah Chun, their official liaison, was particularly puzzling. A woman who appeared to be in her early 40s by human standards, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to command. Yet she showed no sign of the arrogance or superiority that might be expected from a representative of such a powerful civilization. "We're honored by your visit," Chun said as she welcomed them aboard the orbital station. "It's not often we receive such a distinguished delegation. I trust your journey was comfortable." The station itself was a study in functional design. Corridors were well lit and efficient, but not spectacular. The technology was advanced, but not incomprehensibly so. Artificial gravity felt natural, atmospheric recycling was seamless, and the overall impression was of competent engineering rather than miraculous innovation. Captain Chun, Kethvar, said carefully, his translator rendering his words into flawless human standard. "We come seeking answers about the incident at Altair Prime. Your fleet's actions there have raised certain questions among the galactic community." Chen's expression remained pleasantly neutral. "Of course, I understand there was some confusion about our response to the situation. Please, allow me to show you to the conference room, where we can discuss this properly." The conference room was as unremarkable as everything else they had seen. A simple oval table, comfortable chairs adapted for various physiologies, and a holographic display system that looked to be perhaps a generation or two behind what the Drakmarine military used. Yet something about the space felt significant, as if important decisions had been made here. "The Void Reapers," Chun began without preamble, "have been a concern of ours for some time. When they established a foothold in Altair Prime, we decided intervention was necessary." Admiral Corvin leaned forward, his massive frame creating shadows across the table. "Captain, with respect, we witnessed your intervention. 12 ships against a force that had destroyed 3 coalition fleets. No weapons were fired. No shields were visible. Yet somehow the enemy fled in terror. We need to understand what we saw." Chen was quiet for a long moment, seeming to consider her words carefully. "Admiral, how much do you know about human history?" The question caught them off guard. Dr. Yiltharaz's multiple arms gestured in confusion. "Your species' development is well documented. Standard evolutionary path from single homeworld, technological advancement, following predictable patterns. First contact with galactic civilization approximately 2 centuries ago. The documented history is accurate, but incomplete, Chen said. When we first encountered other spacefaring species, we made a decision to integrate carefully, to observe and learn before revealing our full capabilities. What you witnessed at Altair Prime is something we've spent millennia developing. Not technology, but something far more fundamental. She activated the holographic display, but instead of showing tactical data or star charts, it displayed images of human history. Ancient cave paintings, medieval manuscripts, classical art, and modern photography flowed past in a steady stream. All of it depicted the same theme: humans facing impossible odds and somehow prevailing. Every species in the galaxy has legends, Chen continued. Stories of ancient heroes, myths about overcoming great darkness, tales of triumph against overwhelming odds. For most civilizations, these are metaphors, cultural expressions, entertainment. The images shifted to show historical records of human conflicts. David facing Goliath, Thermopylae, the Battle of Britain, countless other moments where small groups of humans had stood against vastly superior forces and somehow emerged victorious. For humanity, their instruction manuals. Kethvar felt his nervous system go cold. I'm afraid I don't understand. Chen's smile was gentle, but somehow unsettling. Humans don't see impossible odds as a reason to surrender. We see them as a challenge to be overcome. When faced with forces that should be able to defeat us, we don't accept that reality. We change it. She gestured to another display showing brain scans, genetic sequences, and psychological profiles. It took us thousands of years to understand what made us different. Other species evolved to survive by avoiding threats, by working within the limitations of their environment. Humans evolved to survive by refusing to accept those limitations. The data was staggering. Human neural patterns showed activity in regions that didn't correspond to any known brain structures in other species. Their genetic code contained sequences that served no identifiable biological function, yet appeared to be actively maintained across generations. Most disturbing of all were the psychological profiles, which showed cognitive patterns that bordered on species-wide delusion. You're describing a form of collective psychosis, Dr. Yiltharas said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced of her own words. Or evolution's solution to an impossible problem, Chen replied. When you face extinction, you have 2 choices: accept your fate or rewrite the rules. Humanity chose option 2, and we've been refining that choice for millennia. Commander, Thaxion scales rippled with agitation. You're suggesting that humans can simply will reality to conform to their desires? That's not science, it's fantasy. Is it? Chen asked. You saw 12 human ships turn back a force that had defeated hundreds of your best vessels. You watched weapons that phase through conventional defenses simply stop existing when they encountered our hulls. You witnessed the Void Reapers, creatures that feed on terror and despair, flee in panic from opponents who hadn't even fired a shot. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Admiral Corvin was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. How was it possible? Chen's expression grew serious. Consciousness shapes reality more than most species realize. Your civilizations developed along rational lines, accepting the universe as it is and working within its constraints. Humanity developed by rejecting constraints, by insisting that the impossible was merely difficult. She activated another display, this one showing quantum field equations that hurt to look at directly. The mathematics seemed to fold in on itself, creating patterns that suggested reality was far more malleable than conventional physics suggested. We call applied ontology, Chen explained, the science of making things true through absolute conviction. It requires perfect unity of purpose, complete rejection of doubt, and a willingness to stake everything on the belief that reality can be changed. The images showed human children learning meditation techniques that looked more like military training. Schools where students practiced maintaining impossible beliefs in the face of contradictory evidence. Military academies where officers learned to command reality itself through sheer force of will. Every human who served in our deep space fleet undergoes decades of conditioning, Chun continued. They learn to reject the concept of inevitable defeat, to see through illusions of impossibility, to maintain absolute faith in human capability even when facing gods. Kethvar's tentacles trembled as he processed this information. The entire population is trained in this ability to varying degrees. Most humans never need to use it consciously, but it influences everything we do. Why do you think human athletes constantly break records that should be physiologically impossible? Why do our scientists make breakthroughs that violate accepted theories? Why do our artists create works that move species they've never met? The evidence was overwhelming once they knew what to look for. Human achievements that had been attributed to luck, innovation, or exceptional individual talent suddenly revealed a different pattern. They weren't succeeding despite the odds. They were systematically rewriting what the odds meant. The Void Reapers, Admiral Corvin said slowly. They recognized what they were facing. Chen nodded. Creatures of pure entropy and despair can't exist in the presence of absolute determination and hope. When 12 human ships approached their fleet with perfect certainty of victory, reality itself began to shift around us. The Reapers' weapons couldn't function because we simply didn't accept their ability to harm us. Dr. Yilthara's voice was hollow with shock. You're describing cognitive abilities that approach godhood. Not godhood, Chen corrected. Just evolution taking a different path. Gods are limited by the rules they create. Humans learn to exist outside those rules entirely. The conference room seemed to contract around them as the weight of this revelation settled in. Humanity wasn't just another member of the galactic community. They were something fundamentally different, a species that had weaponized belief itself and turned it into a force capable of reshaping reality. Why reveal this to us? Commander, Faxion asked. You could have maintained the illusion of normalcy indefinitely. Chen's expression grew sad. Because the universe is changing and hiding won't be possible much longer. The Void Reapers were just the beginning. There are older things stirring in the dark between galaxies, forces that predate consciousness itself. Humanity can't face them alone. She stood, moving to the viewport that showed Earth hanging in space below them. We're going to need allies who understand what they're fighting for. Species willing to learn that reality is negotiable, that the impossible is just another word for difficult. The assembled diplomats exchanged glances, each recognizing that they were at crossroads. The comfortable universe they had known was gone, replaced by something far stranger and more dangerous. They could return to their peoples with comfortable lies about human technology, or they could accept the truth and everything it implied. What would you need from us? Kethvar asked quietly. Chen's smile was fierce. Everything. We're going to teach you how to believe in victory so completely that defeat becomes impossible. We're going to show you how to face the dark and make it blink first. We're going to help you become something the old gods never imagined. She turned back to face them, and for just a moment, they could see it. The absolute certainty that burned behind her eyes, the complete rejection of any reality that didn't include human victory. It was terrifying and inspiring in equal measure. But first, Chan continued, we're going to show you why the Void Reapers weren't running from 12 human ships. They were running from what those ships represented. The promise that no matter how dark the universe becomes, there will always be someone stubborn enough to turn on the lights. 6 months had passed since the revelation on Earth, and the training facility hidden in the asteroid belt beyond Neptune hummed with impossible activity. Kethvar flexed his tentacles, feeling the strange, new patterns of thought that the human instructors had been teaching him. The concepts were alien, uncomfortable, requiring him to abandon logical frameworks that had served his species for millennia. Focus on the target. instructed Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a compact human woman whose eyes held the same unsettling certainty they had seen in Captain Chun. Don't think about the metal's molecular structure or its material properties. Think about what you need it to become. Before them sat a simple steel bar, 1 meter in length and apparently solid throughout. The exercise seemed absurd. 30 representatives from 15 different species, all attempting to convince themselves that a piece of metal could be bent with pure thought. Yet Kethvar had seen the human students perform this same exercise with casual ease. Dr. Yilthara struggled beside him, her multiple arms trembling with effort as she stared at her own metal bar. This defies every principle of material science I've spent my career studying, she muttered. Steel has specific tensile strength, molecular bonds that require precise amounts of energy to break. I can't simply ignore physics. That's your first mistake, Rodriguez said, her voice patient but firm. You're trying to work within the rules instead of changing them. Humans don't break molecular bonds. We convince the universe that the bonds were never that strong to begin with. Admiral Corvin watched from the observation area, his massive frame tense with concentration. The veteran commander had volunteered to undergo the training himself, despite the protests of his medical staff. At his age, they claimed, attempting to rewire fundamental cognitive patterns was dangerous. Corvin had replied that facing the unknown without every possible advantage was even more dangerous. The training facility itself was a testament to humanity's capabilities. Built inside a hollowed-out asteroid, it existed in a state of controlled impossibility. Gravity pointed in different directions depending on which corridor you walked. Rooms were larger inside than their external dimensions should allow. Training chambers where the laws of physics were negotiable, where students learned to see reality as a suggestion rather than an absolute rule. The key, Rodriguez continued, is understanding that consciousness came before matter, not the other way around. The universe didn't create minds. Minds created the universe. Every time you observe something, you're actually deciding what it is. Commander Thaxion's bar suddenly bent in half with a sound like breaking crystal. The Drakmari officer stared at it in shock, his reptilian features frozen in disbelief. I simply imagined it was already bent, he whispered. I pictured it curved and refused to see it any other way. The breakthrough rippled through the group. If Thaxion could do it, if a species known for their rigid adherence to protocol and logic could learn to bend reality through will alone, then perhaps there was hope for all of them. Kethvar closed his 4 eyes and reached out to touch the metal bar. Instead of feeling its solidity, he tried to perceive it as Rodriguez had taught them, as a temporary arrangement of energy pretending to be solid matter. The metal felt warm under his tentacles, but more than that, it felt uncertain, as if it wasn't quite sure what it was supposed to be. Good, Rodriguez said, appearing beside him without seeming to have moved. You're feeling the quantum uncertainty that underlies all matter. Now tell it what you need it to become. The bar twisted like soft clay, coiling around itself in impossible spirals. Kethvar opened his eyes to see a sculpture that should have required industrial equipment to create, shaped by nothing more than his focused intent. The implications made his nervous system flutter with a mixture of excitement and terror. Congratulations, Rodriguez said with a small smile. You've just taken your first step toward thinking like a human. The training intensified over the following weeks. They learned to maintain contradictory beliefs simultaneously, to hold absolute certainty about impossible outcomes, to see through the illusions of limitation that constrained other species. Most challenging of all, they learned to accept that failure was not inevitable, that any situation could be changed through sufficient application of will and imagination. The psychological conditioning was as important as the practical exercises. Hours spent in meditation chambers where they practiced rejecting negative outcomes. Combat simulations where they learned to face overwhelming odds with unshakable confidence. Philosophy sessions where they dissected the nature of reality itself, learning to see it as a collaborative fiction rather than an immutable law. The hardest part for most non-human species, explained Dr. Marcus Webb, the facility's chief instructor, is overcoming evolutionary programming. Your ancestors survived by accurately assessing threats, by accepting limitations, by working within environmental constraints. Humans survived by refusing to accept those constraints. Webb was an unsettling figure, a man who appeared to be in his 60s but moved with the fluid grace of someone much younger. His eyes held depths that suggested he'd seen things that would break lesser minds, and his presence seemed to bend probability around him in subtle ways. Students found that electronics worked better in his vicinity, that accidents were less likely to occur, that the impossible seemed marginally more possible. Human children learn applied ontology before they learn to read, Webb continued. They're taught that monsters under the bed disappear when you turn on the light, not because the light reveals nothing is there, but because the act of looking changes what's there. They learn that believing in themselves isn't just psychological comfort. It's a fundamental force of nature. The assembled students watched as Webb approached a training drone, a sophisticated piece of military hardware armed with non-lethal but painful energy weapons. The drone's sensors locked onto him immediately, its weapon systems charging with an audible whine. This drone is programmed to fire on any target within range, Webb explained conversationally. Its targeting systems are military-grade. Its reaction time is measured in microseconds, and its accuracy is approximately 99.7% at this distance. The drone fired. The energy blast struck Webb's center mass and simply stopped. Not absorbed, not deflected, not dispersed. The beam hit him and ceased to exist, as if reality had simply edited out the inconvenient fact of his being shot. However, Webb continued without missing a beat. I don't accept that it can hit me. Therefore, it can't. Dr. Yiltharaz's voice was barely audible. You're describing selective reality editing. I'm describing applied ontology in its most basic form, Webb replied. The drone exists in a reality where its weapons are effective. I exist in a reality where they're not. When those realities intersect, the universe has to choose which set of rules to follow. Human training teaches reality to make the right choice. The demonstrations became increasingly impossible as their training progressed. Students learned to walk through walls by refusing to acknowledge their solidity. They practiced running faster than their physiology should allow by rejecting the limitations of muscle and bone. They studied levitation through the simple expedient of forgetting that gravity applied to them. Most unsettling were the combat exercises. Sparring matches where human instructors would face overwhelming odds and emerge victorious not through superior technique or equipment, but through absolute certainty of success. Kethvar watched a single human trainee defeat 6 Drakmari warriors simultaneously, not because she was faster or stronger, but because she simply didn't believe losing was possible. The enemy's greatest weapon, Master Sergeant Rodriguez explained after one particularly brutal demonstration, is convincing you that you can be defeated. Once you accept that possibility, you've already lost. Humans learn to exist in a state of permanent victory, not through arrogance, but through fundamental rejection of any other outcome. The true scope of human capabilities became clear during a field exercise in the outer system. The training group was aboard a human vessel, supposedly a simple transport ship, when they encountered a Void Reaper scout force that had somehow evaded galactic detection networks. 3 biomechanical nightmares materialized from hyperspace, their living hulls pulsing with the malevolent hunger that had traumatized a dozen star systems. Energy readings spiked off the charts as weapons that could dissolve matter at the subatomic level charged to firing readiness. All students to the observation deck, came the calm announcement from the ship's captain. This will be an educational demonstration. Kethvar rushed to the viewport along with the other trainees, expecting to see the ship's defensive systems activating or weapons powering up. Instead, he saw something that challenged his sanity. The human crew simply continued their normal duties. Engineers maintained their schedules. The bridge crew chatted casually about dinner plans. The captain was reading a book, occasionally glancing up at the tactical display, showing 3 apocalyptic threats bearing down on them. "Sir," the tactical officer reported with the tone one might use to mention a minor scheduling conflict. "3 Reapers approaching from starboard. Should I adjust course to avoid them?" "No need," the captain replied without looking up from his book. "They'll be leaving shortly." The Void Reaper ships opened fire, unleashing entropy beams that had previously carved through moon-sized asteroids. The weapons struck the human vessel and simply faded, not blocked or absorbed. They hit the hull and lost the will to continue existing. "Fascinating," Dr. Yilthara whispered. "The weapons are functioning normally until they encounter your reality field. Then they give up." "That's one way to put it," the captain said, still reading. "The Reapers exist in a universe where their weapons are absolute. We exist in a universe where human ships are protected. When those universes interact, ours takes precedence." The Void Reaper fleet hung in space for several minutes, their biomechanical forms writhing with confusion. Weapons that had never failed before suddenly couldn't function. Energy readings fluctuated wildly as their reality began to conflict with the humans' unshakable certainty. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the Reapers fled. 3 vessels that could have devastated entire fleets turned and ran from a single human transport ship whose crew hadn't even bothered to stop reading. "Why didn't they try other weapons?" Admiral Corvin asked, his voice tight with disbelief. "Surely they have backup systems, alternative attack methods." The captain finally looked up from his book, his expression mildly curious. What would be the point? If their primary weapons can't function, why would their secondary systems work? Once reality establishes that they can't hurt us, that truth applies to everything they might try. The return journey to the training facility passed in contemplative silence. The students had moved beyond simple demonstrations of human capabilities to witness something that fundamentally challenged their understanding of existence itself. They were no longer learning unusual techniques. They were being initiated into a completely different way of being. "The hardest part," Master Sergeant Rodriguez explained during the debriefing, "is accepting that the universe isn't as solid as you think it is. Every species develops certain assumptions about what's possible and what isn't. Humans learned to question those assumptions." She activated a holographic display showing the quantum structure of space-time itself, patterns that seemed to shift and change depending on how they were observed. Reality is collaborative. Every conscious mind in the universe is constantly voting on what gets to be real. Most species cast their votes based on what they've been told is possible. Humans learn to vote for what they need to be possible. Dr. Yilthara studied the display with growing comprehension. "You're describing consciousness as a fundamental force, like gravity or electromagnetism." "More fundamental," Rodriguez replied. "Gravity affects matter. Consciousness creates it." The implications were staggering. If consciousness truly was the base level of reality, then sufficiently trained minds could rewrite the rules that govern physical existence. The humans hadn't developed superior technology or evolved beyond other species. They had simply learned to think in ways that made impossibility impossible. How many humans can do this?" "Commander," Faxion asked. Rodriguez's smile was enigmatic. "Every human has the potential. Most never need to develop it consciously. But in crisis situations, when survival depends on refusing to accept defeat, the training activates automatically." Kethvar thought back to the historical records they had studied, the countless instances of humans achieving impossible victories against overwhelming odds. How many of those miraculous triumphs had actually been conscious applications of applied ontology? How many human heroes throughout history have been unconsciously rewriting reality to ensure their success? "There's something else," Rodriguez continued, her expression growing serious. "Something we haven't told you yet. The Void Reapers that fled from Altair Prime and the scouts we encountered today, they're not the real threat. They're symptoms of something much worse approaching our galaxy." She activated another display, this one showing the vast spaces between galaxies where no light had shone for billions of years. In those empty regions, something was moving, something so old and vast that even long-range sensors struggled to define its boundaries. The Harbingers are coming, Rodriguez said quietly. Entities that predate consciousness itself. Forces of pure negation that exist to unmake everything thought has created. The Void Reapers were just their advanced scouts, testing our defenses. The room fell silent as the weight of this revelation settled in. They had thought they were learning to defend themselves against raiders and pirates. Instead, they were preparing for a war against the fundamental opposition to existence itself. Why us? Dr. Yilthara asked. Why are you teaching these abilities to non-humans? Rodriguez's expression was grim. Because when the Harbingers arrive, humanity alone won't be enough. We're going to need an entire galaxy that refuses to accept defeat, billions of minds all voting for the same impossible outcome. She looked around the room at the assembled representatives, species that had spent their entire evolutionary history accepting limitations and working within constraints. We're going to teach you to think like humans. And then, together, we're going to convince the universe that hope is stronger than entropy.